Tomb Raider, The Angel of Darkness. Adapted from the novelization by J.R. Millward. Based on an original story by A. Murty Schofield. With J.R. Millward, Adam Coover, and Clark Conolf. With music by Peter Connolly and Martin Iverson. Episode 6.
I landed on something wooden and obstinately solid. My body twisted as I hung on, gasping to refill my bruised lungs. My feet dangled over blackness until my grip on the rotten timbers gave out and I tumbled off with a scream. I fell about 4 feet onto cushion-soft sand. Well, that wasn't so bad. I lay still for a few moments, gathering my breath and my wits. The faintest of phosphorescence lit up my boots, hands, and the roughened limestone walls of the passage. For several minutes, adrenaline backwash sluiced through me, untangling my senses and soothing me with endorphins. One fact stood out. I was alive. It's amazing how much we take that statement for granted. Once my breathing had settled down to a less panicked rate, I felt my way along the passage, the glow becoming ever brighter. A few strands of my hair had pulled loose, and a whistling of wind blew them into my face as I trudged on, totally unprepared for what lay ahead. Abruptly, the walls, floor, and ceiling dropped away. I got down on my stomach to peer over the edge and sucked in my breath at the enormity of my discovery. You've seen photos of tunnel excavations, of the sinkholes needed to lower each piece of massive tunnel boring machines into place tens of meters below the surface. Granted, those holes are big, but they were amateur compared to the chamber now in front of me. Bats hung in sleepy clutches from the stalactite-festooned ceiling. A few of the creatures fluttered about, as tiny as gnats in an oil drum. Far below, a dizzying depth that sucked at my eyeballs, majestic lamps, like those of a pirate galleon, proudly ornamented a bridge that had once spanned the chasm's diameter. But the beautiful carvings and masonry had fallen to some ancient calamity, and the span had been messily cloven down its centre, leaving two ends that would never again meet. I slid forward as far as I dared. Below the lamps, shadows encroached, tainted with an eerie bluish glow like St. Elmo's fire. By its light I spotted the cavern floor, which was littered with dark, irregular forms of broken stone. Menacing shapes of gargoyles were festooned all around, leering, snarling, and curling their animalistic mouths in challenge, as though keeping whatever was at the bottom of the cavern at bay. Very carefully, I held a pebble over the edge and counted as it fell. I heard the faint plink 6 hippopotamuses later. A breeze, like the kind you get at the top of very high buildings, rushed past. Piece of cake. Oh, come on. If it wasn't a challenge, how could you possibly enjoy it? With Maggie's words, I felt the old me surfacing. Rivulets of self-belief and audacity that cared nothing for doubt. It sloshed into me like water from a hot spring, bubbling through my fear and washing it clean away. I'd quite forgotten how it felt to be this daring. It had been 26 months since I'd last risked death or explored beyond the confines of my manor. In the time since my return from Egypt, I'd wandered past my trophy room with a strange sense of detachment, as though I could not connect myself with the artefacts within. The Skion and Xi'an dagger, the Khmer iris, and anachronistic taxidermy all seemed to belong to someone else, not the meditative, reclusive woman I had become since Horus's visions. Thanks, Maggie. I needed that. Don't mention it. Infinitely conscious of my surroundings, and more composed than I'd been in a very long time, I began making my descent. Climbing has always been one of my passions. There's something about being intimately connected to the living rock of the earth that stirs the adventurous side of my soul. I remember practicing on the climbing wall at Gordonston's gym, how I had easily scaled it and perched smugly at the top, waiting for the other girls who were puffing and blowing to catch up. Even slipping had been fun, because of the way the harness would arrest my fall, leaving me spinning in mid-air in total comfort. However, I'd quickly tired of that game, and it wasn't long before I was climbing without a safety harness, and then without ropes altogether. My teachers hadn't known whether to congratulate me or file a complaint for setting a bad example. I took my time, following every rib and ridge of stone with my boots' flexible tread. At times I was barely touching the wall at all, placing my whole weight on a few perilous centimetres as I leaned across to gain new purchase. There was a rhythm in my step, a steady little 1-2-3 beat that I counted, dancing from one point to another. My earlier stretching exercises had paid off. I didn't feel a single twinge as my whole body bent and flexed. It was quite cold in the chamber, but my working muscles kept me comfortably warm. By the time I dropped to the ground, stumbling a little to get my balance, I was sweaty, tingling, and smiling in triumph. I looked back up, unable to resist the sudden urge to shout. Hello! Just to hear the echoes. Sheer joy filled me for a few precious moments, uniting me with a strength I thought I'd buried beyond recovery. Horus would probably have just said I'd forgotten how to use it. The gravel underfoot collapsed inwards as I tried to walk on it, like being in the top half of an hourglass bulb. In a flurry of sand, I dropped through the grating at its centre, leaving it open in case a quick getaway would be needed. I really hate it when doors close behind me for no reason. The passage wound steadily downwards, growing noticeably warmer with each step. The spectral luminescence twinkled on the walls like frost, although the air carried no hint of moisture. All I could hear were my footsteps crunching and the claustrophobic sound of my own breathing. I almost tripped over the shriveled corpse. My heart was in my throat as I prodded the husk experimentally with my toe. It didn't seem to be in imminent danger of rising to chew out my guts, a reality I've had to deal with far too often. The corpse's limbs were stretched out, as though trying to claw the way back to daylight and safety, away from an ominously bolted oak doorway further down the tunnel. The tattered remains of medieval-style clothing clung to its bones. After wrenching off the body's head, arms and legs, just to be on the safe side, I rolled it over and disconnected a crossbow from the remains of its strap. 14th century hand arbalest, lever type trigger, ash stock. Not bad. I blew off the dust and sighted along the lathe, checking for warping. To my surprise, the whole assemblage was in absolutely perfect condition. From the iron stirrup to the hempen string, nothing had degraded in the tomb-dry atmosphere. There was even a handful of wicked little bolts hidden in a bag, safe in their waxen casings. I wonder who he was. Probably a tactless grave robber. I squatted by the body. My questing hands rummaged through his pack and came away brushing sand off a leather-bound book. The pages were as fragile as tissue, but I was used to handling ancient documents. It had been written in Latin, the scholarly language of the day. October 17th, 1445. Since my master Peter's incarceration, I have laboured
long months, seeking this stronghold and pursuing whereby I might secure his release from this fetid pit. Such knowledge as I have gathered has led me here, to this place, beneath the city. Precious knowledge that the Black Alchemist pursued indefatigably for the completion of his own great work. Alas, that I must complete the task and bear the results alone. But I am true and steadfast to my master. The Lux Veritatis are, as yet, unaware of my presence, for I slipped through their guardian wall by the moon's grace. October 18th. Curses lie upon this place. My translations of Master Peter's last orders and the tireless labour of investigation have guided me here. Yet I now wish that I had never set eyes upon this tomb. Such evil inhabits here, thick as shadows, rank with a bilious humour. I feel the necessity to commit an account of my labours to this journal. When others come, following my footsteps, I will need to remember exact on how to instruct them if they are to lay waste to this accursed Veritatis nest. October 19th. Alas, I am weakened, and writing demands such great effort of me. Today has been a most terrible day. Guardians within the great hall caught me unawares. I know them to be cursed by the Lux Veritatis, condemned to walk as shadows, a vile mockery of the Black Alchemist's own revered powers. Oh, how clumsy and decrepit they seem to me, yet so soon removed from life. Hallowed Master Peter, should your eyes ever behold these humble words, be glorified in knowing how pitiable are the skills of your enemies compared to your own. Alas, even so, my arrogance cost me dear, for they hunted and trapped me within the vault for many hours. I hear them, even now, waiting behind the stone, breathless, yet ferocious, eager for slaughter. I must force a way through their ranks. I can tarry no longer. Great Master, grant me the strength by your mighty will. October 22nd. My end approaches. I have failed. But perhaps others loyal to his great work may come and lift my burden from me. I cut down my terrifying assailants, though each one took many arrows and did not cease their hunt for me. My only resort was to leave them crawling below whilst I climbed to the higher chamber. Oh, my master, forgive my base frailty. In my terror, I fled that place and its guardian. It was the shade of Brother Obscura. worse and stronger than the others, despite sharing their fate, who forced me from the painting's resting place. My strength could not match his. Living in death has not diminished his power. It is days since I entered this accursed tomb, and I feel my own death close, so close. The sword wound inflicted by the thrice damned Veritatis shades festers and torments me. My breath comes hard, and for truth I can neither climb nor scarce move. Beware, beloved master, when you enter here,
for their vigilance is tireless, and they strike without mercy. A servant or an ally of the black alchemist Peter van Eckhart, trying to get the painting while their master remained a captive? I knew almost nothing about the man or his master, but a sudden revulsion seized me and I got to my feet. He was a fanatic. He came here and died because he believed it was what his master wanted. He was after the painting on Eckhart's behalf, but he failed. Something in there didn't want him to succeed. My heart sank. It's been my experience that when ancient tomb builders employ curses and guardians, they don't skimp on quality. Whatever killed this man could still be here, and as eager to defend the painting now as it had been centuries ago. I slung the crossbow across my shoulders. It would give me something to hit things with, if nothing else. My nagging fears were pushed firmly to the back of my mind as I shoved the corpse out of the way with my foot. I needn't have worried about getting past the door. Its bolts offered no resistance as I slid them open, and the lack of damp had left the frame unwarped. I had barely gone 5 paces when my eyes widened. The passageway's rough-hewn walls transformed into finely wrought stone, in shades of honey, burnt sugar, and vintage brandy, polished to a mirror shine. Willowy pillars and buttresses stood like an honour guard down the hall, the length of a cricket pitch. Lamps of copper and crystal hung from chains, gleaming with a fey radiance that made my reflection in the walls seem pale and fearful. Despite the hallway's elegance, I couldn't help but sense a quiet malevolence watching my every move. A presence that was affronted by my intrusion and would not hesitate to inflict suitable punishment given the chance. Was that what the man had fled from? Don't let that imagination run away with you. Trust me, your instincts. I'll keep you safe. I had reached the end of the hallway and paused at a plain-looking wooden door, where I strained to listen for anything lurking on the other side. When have I ever ignored your advice? Well, there was that one time in Egypt when Werner tried to save our life. Bitterness caught me unawares. In my annoyance, I flung the door open, meeting sudden resistance. A tangle of rags, rusting armour and brown-stained bones clattered to the floor from where the dead body had been stood on the other side of the door. A helmet, an early medieval great helm with a slit visor, rolled and came to rest at my feet. Gingerly I picked it up, feeling the weight of a much desiccated skull rattling around inside. It's just my luck to break things before I get a chance to appreciate them in their natural, undisturbed state. Please don't do that again, Maggie. In case you haven't noticed, this is not a suitable place to make me lose my temper. Kindly save it for when we're back at home. Tossing the helmet aside, I took a moment to appreciate my new surroundings. But what surroundings! My eye drank in arches and balustrades, tiled floors with rich patterns in ochre and gold, and a high domed ceiling as grand as Hagia Sophia itself. The air felt cool on my bare arms and carried the faintest whiff of sulphur and wood smoke. Cautiously, I stalked the chamber's perimeter, wary of traps. The centre of the great room was sunken and inlaid with exquisitely detailed images of the zodiac, the planetary calendars and the seasons. The maiden Aquarius poured foaming jets of jade and lapis from a ewer carved from a single piece of mother of pearl, while Sagittarius, the archer, leapt across a field of stars, his tawny centaur's body alive with threads of amber and mahogany-coloured agate. I was astonished at the artistry, and even more amazed that such a thing was set into the floor, where careless feet could tramp and scuff it into oblivion. It seemed sacrilegious to present such beauty where it could be so easily damaged. An eerie hush hung over the chamber, undulating with the echoes of my booted feet, like being underwater. I felt there should be people, hooded and cloaked and chanting in solemn procession. There were 13 doors leading off the hall. Plates of burnished gold hung above 12 of them, each plate etched with a random symbol, one of the old signs for each of the 4 elements. The same 4 symbols made up a central montage in the floor, fitting together into one seamless whole. On the far side of the room, under a piece of broken stairway, 4 tiny alcoves stared back at me, their receptacles empty. Nothing in Werner's notebook had prepared me for this. Nothing mentioned in Carvier's research had suggested quite such a grand hiding place for the painting. I've learned to keep a fairly liberal imagination of the things people can create when they put their minds to it, but to think that all of this had been constructed in secret hundreds of years ago below Paris, which even then had been a bustling city, was impressive to say the least. I suddenly felt very, very small. So, logically, I can only move on once I've filled those 4 alcoves. The holders are all the same except for the theme. Spring for water, summer for fire, autumn for earth, and air for winter. And the doors should lead me to each, what, key? Crystal? Signed cricket ball? It's about the same size. But 12 doors and only 4 receptacles. How will I know which is the right one? Brooding, I let my eye hover on the chamber's central chandelier. It dominated the room like a thundercloud made of black iron, its sconces thick with candles that smoked and gave off a heavy, languid light. It's uncanny how the places I explore almost always have some form of lighting, be it cave mould, torches, or the wan, fairy-like lamps I'd seen earlier. It's not as though anyone else could have gotten into these sealed ancient sites to light them before me. I suspect there's a secret society behind it all. Every now and then, a drop of molten tallow would drip down onto the magnificent tiled floor. If the normal laws of nature applied, then the bejewelled patterns should have been covered with several centuries' worth of wax. But even as I watched, the greasy blemish disappeared without a trace. Ever alert for traps waiting to slice my face off, I took a deep breath and prodded the symbol for fire. Immediately, the 3 doors opposite me groaned and shuddered open. 3 doors, each with 3 symbols underneath them, and only one that would lead me to the key. I approached. Through each door was a short hallway connected to its neighbours by portcullises. Identical levers were placed within each compartment, and it was obvious that pulling a lever would either open into a new chamber beyond, or possibly cause the not very stable wooden floor to collapse. I hoped that dry rot wouldn't do the same thing as mistakenly pulling the wrong lever. There was a plaque just above each lever, each with a different elemental symbol on it. As my fingers closed around the handle, it occurred to me that these were different to the plate symbols hanging above the doors. I had chosen the doorway for fire, but the symbol by my hand was for wind. How very sneaky. I smiled, pulling my hand away and going back to choose a different doorway. Now, the symbol above the lever in my hand was a sunburst of flames. Let's hope I'm as clever as I look. I gritted my teeth and wrenched the metal lever down with all my strength. My whole body tensed to flee, but then the portcullis ahead of me rose a few feet, jerking up in a series of wobbly motions, reminiscent of a drunk staggering up a flight of stairs. Musty, sulphurous air billowed around me like a cloak. I held my nose and entered, feeling the temperature rise with each step. Gradually, the room opened out into a long, low cavern, half hidden in dusty gloom. Chills of foreboding ran up and down my spine, as though I'd stepped into the lair of a sleeping dragon. A blood-red gleam, like the scope of a sniper rifle, winked at me from the far end. Squinting like mad, I made out a globular crystal about the size of my fist, nestling in the cupped hands of a leering statue. Bingo. Let me be perfectly clear. Impatient people get killed very, very quickly in my line of work. I knew where I wanted to be, and I could see the obvious way to get there. But you'd have thought the floor was studded with 10-inch sharpened nails by the way I crept down from the doorway, testing each and every step before committing to it. Some sixth sense made me pause and look to my left. A fanged shape wound around the doorframe, up and over and down the right side, becoming twin serpents. Their cold stone bodies were picked out with scales of obsidian that looked sharp enough to cut skin. Their ruby eyes seemed to mesmerize me. I had my gun drawn in a nanosecond, but instead of striking, their mouths glowed red, then white-hot. A stream of fire oozed from between their fangs, thicker than treacle, deadly and hypnotic. Iron. Molten iron. You can tell from the smell. Over 1,000 degrees centigrade, at least. My gun tracked the flow as it cut across grooves scored into the flagstones. They had all been cut into curious hexagonal shapes and sloped gently downwards to a sunken region of bare rock between me and my goal. The heat from the streams of glowing metal as they dripped inexorably across the stones was phenomenal. A wave of concussion was my only warning. I threw myself flat, hands over my head. Rock smashed and cracked apart, obliterating everything in its path. My inner voice was screaming somewhere in my head, but I could barely even hear her. The ground trembled, making me draw up my knees into a fetal position. The light burned red through my closed eyelids, and I smelt singed hair and shrieked as the skin on the back of my arms and neck began to blister. Then, quite suddenly, the firestorm died. If I'd been standing when it hit, I'd probably have been vaporized. The region between me and the crystal now shimmered with fierce heat. The entire floor had been lost under a lake of bubbling, spitting liquid metal. Scarlet around the edges where the walls were cooler, but brightening to the incandescence of a 100-watt light bulb at its centre. A few lonely flagstones stood out as dark spots in the white-hot glare. If I was to get what I came for, I'd have to cross it. Holstering my weapon, and wondering how on earth I'd talked myself into this, I made my way carefully down. Areas of the floor had been ripped apart by the force of the explosion, leaving behind rough-edged pits that smoked and smouldered. A haze of fine grey ash choked the chamber, stinking of rotten eggs and scorched metal. Embers flew like crazed fireflies, darting into my face or patting harmlessly against my clothes. I paused to tear off a length of emergency bandage from my medkit to wrap around my mouth and nose to protect them. Particles stung my eyes as I squinted, picking out a path from the stepping stones. I don't remember the words, but Maggie and I were both praying as we made our way across. The heat was indescribable, 10 times more painful, more draining than the split second you might let your hand hover over a candle flame. Each stone must have been less than a hand's width above the lake, and some rocked alarmingly as I stepped on them. The soles of my boots grew tacky, expiring in fine melted threads with each raised step. If I didn't hurry, they would melt completely, and the prospect of leaping from stone to stone barefoot lent me all the extra impetus I needed. My relief was a palpable thing as I reached the other side, practically falling into the statue's arms. For several seconds I leaned against it, struggling to breathe, dreading the trip back, but grateful that I had at least made it this far. You can't stay here. Look, there's the crystal. Grab it and get out of here while we still can. All right, all right. I gingerly pried the crystal from its holder. It was surprisingly heavy and hissed, searing my hands as I yelped, tossing it from palm to palm, until it cooled enough for me to slip it harmlessly into my backpack. By then, my lungs were aching, every breath like having acid pour down my throat. The heat was a crippling, hurtful thing, scalding my exposed skin like bad sunburn as I staggered back to the lake and started making my way back. About a metre from safety, the flagstone beneath my foot wobbled and sank without warning. My arms flung out automatically as I fell, grabbing the shoreline. It crumbled, but held my weight as I scrambled the last few inches. The stone disappeared with a fiery gasp, the toe of my boot just brushing the surface of the molten lake, trailing wisps of smoke as I rolled myself out of harm's way. I was almost crying with relief as I crawled past the pits, between the serpents, and through the open door. Something deliciously cool was wiping my forehead. A trickle of spring water was eased between my lips. Even though I knew it was an illusion, I nonetheless smiled gratefully. Just checking upon you, my dear. Hwylethwyd, Trondheim. A voice spoke from the darkness. The voice of both a god and an old desert woman, speaking in perfect unison. Can't you stay?
We're sorry. You were doing well enough without our help.
Thanks, both of you.
Courage, Lara.
We will be here when you need us most. My leg itched. Groggily, I rose into a sitting position, massaging my stiff neck, prizing my eyes open. My boots and gloves were still singed, still caked with filth and ash. But my blisters and burns were gone, and my lungs felt as clear as though I had been sleeping high in the mountains of Eden. How long was I out? About 20 seconds, give or take. What in God's name was that? It seems I have friends. Some very resourceful friends. I'll say, was that Horus I heard? My subconscious's reaction to my vision, or whatever it was, amused me for some reason. Perhaps I'd become too blasé about my encounter in the desert. For many long years I had relied heavily on the scientific, logical side of my nature. But Putai, the Tuareg shaman who had guided me after my disastrous adventure in Egypt, had begun to open my eyes to the supernatural in ways I'd not really considered before. True, I'd battled fire-breathing dragons and ancient immortal beings with tempers shorter than a reality TV contestant's career. True, I'd seen things and places shaped by forces that science had still not fully understood. But until Egypt, I had been satisfied with the assumption that one day, with enough research and experience, science would explain everything. Until Egypt, I'd never had faith in anything except myself. I drew out the pendant from under my shirt, a shape that was almost, but not quite, an ankh. The little girl who had given it to me spun in my memories, joking and laughing as we watered the fields under the hot desert sun. Come on, girl. Can't let the homeside down, now can we?
In episode 6 of Tomb Raider, The Angel of Darkness, Lara Croft and Putai were played by J.R. Milward. Horus was played by Adam Coover, and Eckhart's long-dead follower was played by Clark Connell. Written and adapted by J.R. Milward. Based on an original story by A. Murty Schofield. With music by Peter Connolly and Martin Iverson. Additional sound effects courtesy of www.freesfx.co.uk and the BBC. Produced by Stephen Milward. With special thanks to Ash Kaprilov. Lara Croft and Tomb Raider are the property of Crystal Dynamics and Square Enix.